Welcome to the 87th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to preview our game against Rice. Let's get started. So going into the bye week, we kind of had this question of what was going to be the topic of discussion. And I think we thought it was going to be a discussion on whether or not Owen should be the starting quarterback, just based on what we saw from social media right after the ECU game.
Right.
But I think it turns out really to be this story about the all-player meeting that they had this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I don't think I saw coming at all. And I probably wouldn't have known about it had they not said anything about it. And I think it was Coach Traylor that brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not something we've heard about during the Traylor era, for sure. They asked Brandon Brown and Zay Frazier about it today, and it turns out that this meeting was organized by a Sirius Simon. And not only did he organize it, but he was also the one that led the meeting. And I found that kind of interesting, first of all, because going into the season, Sirius Simon was someone who talked a lot about the fact that he wanted to be a single digit. And he didn't get it. And you just never know how some guys are going to react to that disappointment.
Right.
So I thought it was really good to see that rather than allowing that to discourage him, he recognized that there was an opportunity, that somebody needed to step up on this team and somebody needed to offer a different style of leadership. And he took that initiative to not only organize this meeting, but then to lead the meeting. And from what we heard today, it wasn't just, a couple of guys showing up. The entire team participated in the meeting. So I thought it was interesting. And I was really glad to see that, he hadn't allowed not getting a single digit to kind of discourage him overall. But
yeah, I mean, I think it shows what kind of respect the team has for a Sirius, right?
mm-hmm.
I mean, you just talked about that he was not a single digit. So just because he wasn't, like, you could have they could have said, blown him off and been like, no,
Sure.
no, our culture says that, single digit means this. So nah. But the fact that, as you pointed out, all of this happens, yeah, kudos to Cyrus or Sirius, however you say his name.
Are you surprised, though, that this wasn't organized by one of our single digit guys?
Yes and no. Yes, I would say, because I think my assumption of single digits is that they're supposed to be like the overall leaders of this team on offense and defense. And sometimes you throw in the special teams. But no, in that you've got to have different leaders, to me, in like an organization. So, and football teams aren't any different than our regular day-to-day lives. Like, you're going to have people that are vocal leaders. You're going to have people that are not vocal. You have to tailor whatever it is, the way you lead to your team. And in this case, I mean, don't you get the feeling that a lot of these single digits this year are more the non-vocal, lead by example leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard that over and over again. I mean, with the exception of Danye Taylor,
Well,
most
sure.
of these guys are just, they're not as vocal as, what we've heard in the past from Frank and Rashad. And especially if you look at the zeros, both Oscar Cardenas and Jamal Ligon are both very soft-spoken guys. They certainly do have the respect of their teammates, but they're not going to be Frank and Rashad. They're just very different people.
Maybe this is an opportunity, based on whatever the conversation was in that players only meeting, that the players give feedback to Traylor and the rest of the coaching staff, because you miss on calls during a game, you miss on recruiting, you miss on a lot of things. Isn't it possible that the coaching staff and the players could have missed on some single digit guys?
Yeah, like maybe they didn't necessarily recognize or appreciate some of the talents of some of the people, right? And put them higher up on their list.
Yeah, and it just could be just the fact that, look, maybe looking back, they just didn't have the right mix of vocal and non-vocal leaders. Like, that could be one of the takeaways. I'm not saying that it is, but it kind of feels like it, based on, you start kind of looking back at the history of these single digits that we've seen. And a lot of it, I think, comes down to the zeros because you had Frank and Rashad, who were the only zeros up until this season because they're finally gone, right? Like
Yeah.
they eventually had to leave. So by the time they finally left, you have to replace them with somebody. And I feel like there's a standard that they kind of put that I don't know is attainable for every
Yeah.
single person that's going to be that zero. It just feels like you're asking them to potentially to be something that they're probably not, and maybe that just inhibits their leadership too.
So, what does it say about Coach Trailer that we had this only meeting? Because a lot of times when you hear about those players only meeting, that means that there's an issue where the players are concerned about the coaching staff, or maybe the coach has lost the team. And I don't think that's necessarily the situation here, but should we be reading into anything about how the players feel about the coaching staff from the fact that they felt the need to have a players only meeting?
Well, what we haven't heard from the players meeting is what the subjects were.
Sure.
And I mean, we could answer if we knew, we would pass that along and say, yeah, this is what they talked about, and these are the subjects. So this one just seems like it was more about probably keeping their heads above water and just continuing to work day by day. You know, the kind of like they always say, stack
Stacking
days
good
on,
days
yeah.
and good days. Yeah.
So that's my assumption. I'm not going to say that that's what I heard. So that's an assumption. But I mean, it could have gone a couple different ways. But the fact that Traylor really never said anything, I mean, we wouldn't get the truth out of him anyway. He'd probably come and say, even if it was negative about him or any of the coaches, it's not like he's going to go out like, oh, yeah, they said that this coach sucks. And so, you know, they don't know anything. They're players, you know, let me tell you about coaching. And, you know, he would have gone on some riff, right? But I don't think it is. I think what's most concerning from last week to me was during interviews when he mentioned that when the team started trailing East Carolina, that he told the team to calm down, but nobody listened to me. That to me was bigger than the players only meeting. Like, I know he's probably exaggerating that nobody listened to him because can you imagine all the assistant coaches
Sure.
and the players saying the old man's lost it? Like he's got no hair on his head and he can't pull it out, so he can't get mad at us, right? So we're not going to listen to him. What does he know? The reality is, I'm sure that his younger players got flustered and it appeared that they didn't listen to him, but they just got flustered in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't able to meet the moment, so things went awry because you get young guys, they get flustered. I mean, that's what happens when you have 18 to 23-year-olds
Right.
playing college football. So I don't know. To me, that was more eye-opening than the players only meeting. But what about you?
Yeah, no, I don't think we should really read anything into this other than I think that the guys needed to come together and figure out a way to get back to the fundamentals, trust each other, trust the process. And, you know, I think that's probably really all that there was. I just think it's something that's not common to hear about at UTSA. And so it may raise some red flags that probably doesn't really need to, just based on the way that, you know, Zay and Brandon articulated it and how
Right.
they, you know, kind of seem to rally around the idea.
Well, I guess we'll figure out potential answers this coming up weekend.
Yep.
So let's just talk about Rice then, because that's our next opponent. UTSA leads the series 8-3 because we've been on an 8-game winning streak since 2014. My guy, Mike Bloomgren, is still there.
Yeah, he is your new Dana Dimmel.
He is. Oh, Dana Dimmel, I miss you. When we moved away from Conference USA, it was hard to like put my sights on Dana Dimmel because he just wasn't in the same conference. I mean, he was still had his own buffoonery going on in El Paso, but now Mike Bloomgren is not at the level of Dimmel, but is the sort of target because he's 0-5 against UTSA. He's lost twice to Frank Wilson and then has lost 3 to Jeff Traylor. They've been outscored 171-51 in total, or an average of 34-10 in between the 5 games. the closest game they had was back in 2019 when it was 31-27, and that was Wilson's last season. That was a game that I remember clearly because Rice had the ball near the end of the game, and in what I should have seen as a symptom of Mike Bloomgren in the future, they had some weird play calls and end up losing that game. So anyway, in the trailer era, Rice has allowed 392.7 yards per game and has gained 187 yards. They've scored a total of 3 touchdowns in UTSA.
That is just insane.
It's mind-boggling, right?
3 touchdowns. I mean, they've played 3 games against trailers, so basically 1 touchdown a game.
Yeah. Yeah. It's silly, but that 2021 team was awful at quarterback. Remember, they had Luke McCaffrey at quarterback.
Yeah. Isn't that the one that we shut them out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a shutout. It was 45-0. And then the next year was the game we went to Houston, and it was raining.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it ended up 41-7.
Oh, and they had, that was 2 or 3 backup quarterbacks in, right?
Oh, they kept bringing anybody in, and nobody was doing anything.
They're looking in the stands. Anybody?
Yeah,
Anybody?
they essentially, they had one long bomb that scored, and that was it. And then last season was, sad to say, the most competitive of the games. In the Dome.
Yeah,
it was close at
halftime. Yeah,
it was close at halftime, but in the second half, it was UTSA's depth that took over, and Rice did what Rice does, and they fell apart. Last year, UTSA turned it around after the bye week, and then they had a game against E.J. Warner and the Owls. So is history going to repeat itself? Because they've had a bye week, and they're facing the Rice Owls, but they're also facing E.J. Warner again.
Yeah. Last time it was E.J. Warner and the Temple Owls. This time it's E.J. Warner and the Rice Owls. So I'm taking that as a positive sign that we turned it around last year when we played EJ, so
we'll get to that.
Hopefully that'll happen again.
As I've looked over this Rice team, I have a big issue with Rice, and it's really twofold. It's not just Mike Bloomgren, but he has not created any sort of offensive identity. He was bringing this intellectual brutality. He's been talking about it, and I don't hear it as much now.
Right.
But the intellectual brutality relies on being tougher than the opponent in every respect, mentally and physically. But right now, the only thing that this offense is brutal to watch. There's no intellectual brutality.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me. You're in year 7 of Mike Bloomgren. You shouldn't be at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But they also made this offhand comment to you when we were watching the Army-Rice game. And I was like, how large is his playbook? And they've talked about how large his playbook is, but it was 8 pages on the sideline. Yeah. He's looking at all these plays. Maybe you stop trying to show how smart you are and just execute one sheet of plays. It just seems ridiculous. If you can't execute the small things, then just pare down. And that's what UTSA has done in the past. Even this season, they've done that. But they're just not buttoned up. I mean, and that's what I'm getting to, is that they just, overall, they lack this execution and crispness in their play. And while they have gotten tougher, I will admit, their defense has gotten tougher.
Right.
But that offensive toughness has not been there. I mean, they've struggled in the run game from year to year. I was looking at them. Okay, how did they do? Because intellectual brutality, they're supposed to be running the ball well. Only twice in his 7 years, to include this season, have they been in double digits in terms of overall rushing game in the country.
Wow.
How can you not develop some offensive linemen, some running backs to be able to punch teams in the mouth? That Army is going to punch you in the mouth. And I get it. It's a different concept. They're an option team. But they stick to what they know. That's their culture. That's what they said they're going to do. So Rice has said, we're going to be this. Yet you don't see that on a year-to-year basis. It's just perplexing.
Yeah.
So let's start talking now about some of the key players on the offense. And we'll start with a familiar name we just talked about, E.J. Warner.
Yeah. Just to recall, last season, going into the Temple game, we kind of had this discussion about EJ Warner and what we had seen on film. And then after the game, here's what you said in the podcast. You said you were wrong about EJ Warner, that you're not saying that he was an elite quarterback, because if he had been an elite quarterback, he could have beat UTSA. But he did a great job escaping the pocket, escaping pressure, moving outside, throwing the ball in the right area. He ended that game at 42 for 65, so a 64% completion rate, 472 yards, and 5 touchdown passes. Part of the criticism we had of him at Temple was, well, it's not really criticism of him, but part of the criticism of that offense was that the offensive line just could not protect him. And we saw EJ Warner get a concussion, and we just thought, man, if this kid doesn't transfer, I mean, he's really going to have problems, because they just couldn't protect him, and he is a pocket passer. So now you see him at Rice, and he's got better protection. He's got time in the pocket, but he didn't have anybody to throw to. Their top 3 wide receivers and their top tight end are out with injury. So you've got EJ now in a situation where he's got time to pass. He just doesn't have anyone to pass to.
So did he make a good trade, I guess is what I'm asking you, from Temple to Rice?
I don't think so. I mean, in terms of like looking at this transfer for EJ, you kind of feel bad for him, because he is a talented kid. He's a talented quarterback, but I don't know that his talent has really shown through at Rice, because again, his percentage of completion is down. His number of touchdowns are down. His interceptions are up. It's like, yeah, I just don't know how this all translates for him in terms of his long-term career.
And that's fair. But I think I was looking over his stats, and I was thinking about what would motivate him to go to Rice. The only thing I could think of was that novel of a playbook that Mike Bloomgren has that potentially would help him develop a little bit more as maybe a professional passer, because we've talked about the fact that Kurt Warner took a circuitous route to the NFL.
Sure.
So do you think that maybe he's going to try to emulate his dad and try to take that kind of UFL to maybe arena to whatever it is to get to a potential like NFL tryout?
I feel like he's going to have to now. I mean, so listen to the stats that I shared for the Temple game, just that one game, compared to where he is, 5 games into the season. So in the UTSA game, he had a 64% completion rate, 472 yards, 5 touchdowns. This season to date, he has a 61% completion rate, 955 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I mean, he almost did almost all of those stats in one game against UTSA, and it's taken him 5 games at Rice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know that Temple really has like the type of playmakers that you could say were light years ahead of Rice.
No.
So I think that's why when you look at him, he's not elite, but he's a very good quarterback that can potentially elevate his skill players,
sure,
which is a special trait. I mean, let's be honest. Like there's not a lot of quarterbacks that could do something like that. And I get that they're 1-4, but like you mentioned, losing your top 3 receiving threats, that could sink anyone.
Right.
His only receiving threat, really, actually the main guy, is Matt Sykes.
Yeah, and Matt Sykes is a senior wide receiver. He's been with Rice for, I think, his entire career, but you haven't heard about him because he's only had 11 receptions over his prior 4 years. This season, he's had 24 receptions for 306 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, I mean, he has more than doubled his production from the prior 4 years, which is impressive. I mean, good for him that he's been able to step up and fill that vacancy and shine. But I'm sure at the beginning of the season, Matt Sykes was probably not expected to be the top receiver, the top 5 receiver, or one of the top 5 receivers this season. So
And watching him play, he's for those of you that remember any of these like Rice wide receivers, they've always got that one guy that like has good hands and just seems to be pesky. Like somehow he always comes down with the ball, but he's not really a game breaker. Like he's not gonna like make one move and then oh wow he's gone. He's not that. He's a possession type receiver, but he's just gonna find a way to like make a tough catch or hang on to that ball. Again, testament to EJ that he's been able to build this chemistry with him. Because, like you said, I don't think he was going to be counted on as one of even the top 4 receivers or
Right.
top 5, I guess, receiving receivers there at Rice. So it's impressive, and a lot of that has to go again to EJ being able to help him reach a level that he hasn't seen in 4 years.
Yeah,
So,
and that he probably didn't even know that he could reach, you
right?
know? But let's be honest, the offense, as much as we've talked about EJ, it starts and stops with Dean Connors, their running back. He was an all conference honorable mention last year, but not only is he a threat in the run game for Rice, he's also one of the top 2 receivers because they don't have a lot of wide receivers available. And actually, he has the most, or prior to the Charlotte game, he had the most running back receptions in all of FBS. He has 28 receptions for 126 yards.
I like Dean Connors. I think he's one of those kind of multi-purpose threats that he's not going to like get a ton of yards rushing. He's not going to get like a ton of yards receiving. But by the end of the game, you're going to be like, how the hell did this guy put together like 110 yards of total offense or 120 yards, right? Like something like that total. And it's never going to be like impressive, like I think, like I said, rushing or receiving stats. It's just, he's just going to find a way. It's kind of like I said about Sykes, nothing really spectacular, but somehow he's just going to make an impact. But to me, Dean Connors though is much more of an impact. You know, Coach Bloomgren said he wants him to have 20 to 30 touches a game. That hasn't happened
Yeah.
at all this season. Well, I mean, it has. Sam Houston State, and I'm only going by the fact that the stats of receptions and total rushing attempts, and he got to 21 against Sam Houston the very first game. After that, he's gotten close to 20 touches, but if you want him to get 20 to 30 touches a game, you need to be able to scheme to that too. Like, how do you move him around to be able to get that many touches? And I think that's part of the problem, like as I mentioned, with the offense, is that Bloomgren has this idea of what it should be, but it just never seems to come to fruition.
Yeah, he does have 55 carries for 369 yards, an average of 6.7 yards per carry, and 4 touchdowns.
Right, and if you could give them more carries, you would, but you're not, like, either they fall behind and they can't really depend on the rush, or, I mean, it's just, Rice is just so perplexing. One thing that to me is not as perplexing is the defense.
Yeah, going into the season, Rice had the top returning pass defense in the league. They were second to SMU, but now, of course, SMU is not in the league anymore. They allowed 211 yards per game and a league low 17 passing touchdowns. But this year, they've allowed 155 yards passing and 8 passing touchdowns. So they're about halfway through that stat already this season.
And it sounds amazing because, yeah, I mean, it really is great stats in terms of the passing offense or the passing defense until you see the rushing defense. And they've allowed 161 yards per game and 8 rushing touchdowns. So, sure, the passing stuff looks good, but if you can't stop the run, there's your problem. And here's the other problem is that if you're not able to stop the run, then you're going to have your offense on the sideline a lot more. So again, yes, they're tough. Yes, they can show so many things, but what's perplexing about this team is that to me they should be at a better spot in terms of year 7 of Bloomgren, whether it's offense or defense. And we're just not there. Now, they are good at sacking the quarterback. They're tied for 5th in the nation. They're averaging 3.5 sacks per game. In their last game against Charlotte, they had 4. But I said that was mostly against Trickster Ivy and not Deshaun Purdy,
Yeah.
because Purdy was much more mobile and was able to sidestep more of this, more of those rushes. So I think when I look at this overall Rice team, there's similarities to UTSA, and I'm almost inclined at times to say that they're just poor man's UTSA. Like if we didn't care about UTSA and didn't really invest in UTSA football, I'd say we'd be pretty close to what Rice football is right now under Mike Bloomgren. All right, let's talk some of the key players for Rice on defense.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, there's been a lot of injuries to Rice, both offense and defense. And, as I was looking back at some of those key players at the beginning of the season, when you're kind of reading the preseason expectations of Rice, a lot of those names aren't playing right now just due to injury, or they haven't consistently played. One of the guys, though, that, they talked a lot about preseason and who has stayed healthy is Josh Percy. He's their senior edge rusher. He's tied for the highest number of sacks at 3.5 sacks this season. He also has 2 quarterback hurries and 20 tackles. It's kind of interesting because he was interviewed during the Charlotte game, and they had asked him, kind of how would you describe Rice's defense? And what he said is, we want to be an offensive style of defense, meaning we want to be the one to dictate to the opponent the types of plays, which I thought was kind of interesting. And again, it shows you a little bit more of the success and the identity that I think Rice defense has had that's lacking on their offense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good call.
Another key player is Michael Larby. He's their senior defensive lineman. He's tied with Josh at 3.5 sacks. He also has 9 tackles and 1 pass defended. And then Sean Fresh, he's a senior cornerback, a little shorter, 5'9", but he leads the team with 4 passes defended, 20 tackles, and 15 solo tackles.
It's again an interesting defense. I think on defense I really have been, like I said before, impressed with their ability to live up more to the intellectual brutality. Yet, I would like to see them be much tougher against the run if they're really going to have that mantra. But at the very least, I think you get the better feeling about them on that side of the ball. But let's talk about special teams.
Yep, fairly inconsistent at special teams. Their kicking has been where you've seen a lot of inconsistencies. They're 4 of 7 on field goals this year. One of the areas, though, that they have been strong is on their kick and their punt return coverage. They've only allowed kick returns of 12.8 yards per game and punt returns of 14.8 yards per game.
So we're gonna have to work for some returns if we are able to get them. So understandable. I mean, again, you start seeing the special teams and the defense seem to have something going for them, whereas the offense is just simply struggling. A lot like UTSA,
yeah,
right?
I was going to say similar to UTSA, yeah.
All right, let's get to the keys to victory. On offense, run the ball with purpose. UTSA has rushed for 261, 262, and 199 yards in the 3 games in the trailer era. Against East Carolina, they put up 170. Yes, I gave caveats as to how they ran, but there's opportunities to run against this Rice defense. We've highlighted the fact that they're giving up about 161 yards per game. So that puts them at least, if you even hit that average, that gives you a good start. And I think that UTSA can put at least some more yards on that. So it's a good start. It just has to be executed on. Now, defensively, number 1, stop the run. That means just stop Dean Connors. Connors hasn't really gone off on UTSA in the past, but 2024 is a new year, and anything can happen, right? So I think you just got to be careful and be able to just bottle them up. And I think they will, because the one thing that UTSA defense is good at is stopping the run. They just have to stay disciplined there. Number 2, this is kind of just, I'm hoping to not laugh too hard on this, but limit EJ's passing options, i.e. limit Dean Connors and Matt Sykes.
Right.
I think you take away those 2 guys and you get to the nexus of it. Make somebody else beat you via the pass. And I think EJ is going to struggle if those two passing options are taken away from him.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if Bloomgren and the offensive staff move Dean Connors around a little bit to see if they can at least get a mismatch on the UTSA defense. So something to watch out for as the game progresses there on Saturday. All right, let's do our Hail Mary predictions. I will start out first. Look, advanced stats hate UTSA. Like, they've got us at, I think, a 36% chance of winning. And look, it's hard to disagree with those predictions because really I'm a numbers guy. Like, that's just who I am, and I make stories from numbers. That's what I did for a long time over my career. So, look, while UTSA continues to lick their wounds, Rice is presenting this opportunity to get things steadied again. Unfortunately, this isn't the UTSA of past seasons. So to me, this is going to be a little interesting. Look, I'm confident that UTSA can win with the defensive and special teams battles. But I'm not sure about the UTSA offense decisively beating this Rice defense. I think they need a jolt of consistent play in order to put this game out of reach. And I'm hoping and betting that they will find enough consistent offensive rhythm to put this game out of reach. I think it's going to be a slog of a game, but give me UTSA 30-21 over Rice.
Yeah, this game shouldn't be one that we're sweating as a fan base, but here we are. We've talked about it. EJ Warner is a talented quarterback, but he has limited options to distribute the ball to. I feel confident that our defense is going to be able to hold their offense in check. Rice's defense is good, but it's not as talented as what we faced at ECU. If Owen can get comfortable early, maintain his composure, and we can establish the run game, we should be able to take and maintain a lead. Given our offensive struggles, I am not going to predict a high-scoring game. But I do think that UTSA will win in the end. Give me UTSA 21, Rice 17.
All right. Before we go, let's talk a little bit of UTSA soccer. Had a match against UNT last Thursday. Ended up being a 2-2 tie, but let's talk a little bit about some of the details in this game. It's a big-time opening free kick goal by Cam Kloza off a header with an assist from Sophie Morin. Just perfectly played. We've seen Cam Kloza, and I hope it's okay to call her Cam Kloza because I've been calling her Cam the whole time, even though I know her full name is Cameron. But she scored against Navy off a header off a corner kick, first game of the season. So, that ability has been there. And in many of the other free kicks that have been close to goal, Pittman has brought Cam up and given her that opportunity. We just haven't always seen that connection happen. But this one, perfectly done, gives us a 1-0 lead. Wasn't until after the second half started that North Texas starts putting some pressure on. They tied up 1-1. 26 seconds later, UTSA quickly recovers the ball, and there's a passing sequence that goes from Sophie Morin to the captain, Olivia Alvarez, to Michelle Polo out on the left wing, and she gives a nice cross. It's finished by Jordan Walker with just a slight nudge of her head right past the UNT goalkeeper. It was just absolutely beautiful play from this UTSA soccer team. They have moments that they look so good, and it's just, you can tell it's just that chemistry that they've had and they've built up. We've talked to Coach Pittman a couple times, and he's talked about the fact that there's certain sequences sometimes that he sees, and he's like, man, that wasn't there early in my tenure. And it's just so nice to see. Talking about more of the game, unfortunately, we lose Sasha Dade during this game.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that once we lost Sasha Dade, things became a problem because Kloza had gotten a yellow early in the game. So she was already she had to kind of back off a little bit. She can't be as aggressive as she normally is. Sasha's out. Our right back was getting beat. So Riley Lowe was kind of getting hurt by that side. That UNT offensive player, I can't remember her first name, but her last name is Brown, was just having her way up that wing. But she was able to keep her locked down enough to not have her score. But with 20 minutes left in the game, the tactics changed. And that's because North Texas went full aggressive mode. They were down 2-1. They're at home. They were at the top or near the top of the table in AAC play. And Pittman did the one thing that he has talked to us before that he does not want to do, and that's he parked the bus, so to speak. Since most of our UTSA team fell back and just absorbed wave after wave of attacks from North Texas. And you can't do much about it because you got Sasha Dade that's out. Your best defender is out. So now you bring in somebody with less experience. They've got so many injuries at this point that he just can't.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not much they can do. Sophie Morin, of course, got a yellow. I mean,
which happens frequently.
I don't know which one's more frequent. A UTSA offensive lineman getting injured or Sophie Morin getting a yellow. Like,
right.
They might be the same. They just might be the same. And so, look, North Texas kept winning the wings. And, because of that and the tactics, you're bound to give up that tying goal. And they did. They finally did with like about 5 minutes left in the game. UTSA tried to make the most of it. They had 2 good attacks after that score. But, you escape Denton with the 2-2 tie. You get a point for the table. They stand currently in 8th place, which is the last spot for the conference tournament. Technically, they're tied points-wise with FAU, but FAU is 1-2-1, and UTSA is 1-3-1 in conference play. So with FAU having the better record, they're slide up into 7th. So that could change. And I say that because UTSA is going to enter this kind of stretch of winnable games versus all the teams at the bottom. They've essentially played all the teams at the top.
Yeah.
They've done well. I think they were like 1-2-1 against the top 4 teams in the AAC currently in the standings. Well, now they get those bottom teams, like I said, Tulsa, Charlotte, and Temple. And it should help them get points in every game. If not, win every single game. If they can win every single game, and I'm crossing my fingers that they can do it, that's going to put them in an excellent spot. They will definitely make the tournament, but it definitely puts them in a very good spot to jump some of these other teams. And then they've got FAU to close everything out. So again, there's opportunities. Hopefully this team can jump on those opportunities because there's a great chance for them to go conference tournament and to make some noise in the conference tournament. The better that they do during the season, more of a chance to avoid that 8th spot and avoid like Rice or whoever ends up at the number 1 spot.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's been frustrating, I know we've talked about it before with this team, is that they just have so many shots on goal and you expect one of them to go in and they're just like so close. Like you just hear the commentators say, oh, that was so close and they're better than their record and they're close. And you just really keep hoping that they're going to put it all together. And if they can make the tournament, I think, again, they're poised really to kind of get to a point where that chemistry and everything just comes together and hopefully they can make a run.
And I'll have to look at the stats, but it's great that they do outshoot their opponent, but what you really want to see is that shots on goal, because that means that the goalkeeper either had to make a save.
Right.
And it's not as easy as it looks. I'm not trying to like point out any deficiencies by the UTSA team, but it would be interesting for me to look back and see from the past seasons, how accurate have we been? Mm-hmm. So next up is this coming Thursday, October 10th at 7 p.m. versus Tulsa at Park West. And we'll also be on ESPN+. It's their pink out game. So students get a chance to get a voucher for a pink shirt. I would say check your emails. I got an email about it. I just forgot what it was, where I should get that voucher and take it for my free pink shirt. So I'll try to be wearing pink on that date.
You have a pink shirt from a previous game,
I do,
but we need to get a new one. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, here's my chance. I'm a student.
That's right.
And then Sunday, October 13th at 11 a.m. at Charlotte, also going to be on ESPN+. So again, 2 good shots here for at least 3 points each for the wins. If not, at least chances to get points, at least a win or a tie, because we need the points.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A. Tobes.
And I'm the Toes.
We'll be back soon to recap our victory over Rice.
Birds up.